Hey there, this is Pat Ennis of ENNIS Legacy Partners. Welcome to the Exit Readiness podcast. I'm here with co-host Walter Dial, who's tax partner at GRF CPAs and Advisors here in Bethesda, Maryland. Our mission here on the podcast is to provide you, the business owner, with subject matter expertise on topics pertaining to building a sellable or transferable business, and then for planning your eventual exit from the business. We want to help you build a business that's sellable and then help you to exit successfully on your own terms and conditions. If you've been a regular listener, and we hope you are, you've heard us from time to time mention what we call the three universal questions that all business owners will need to ask themselves at some point in the future. First, when do I want to leave? What is my targeted departure date? And so that's one question. The second question is, to whom do you want to sell or transfer the business to? At some point, either your business will be owned by somebody else or it's going to cease to exist. So the second question is, do you want to sell to a third party, to my partners, to your key employees, to transfer the business to children who are in the business, perhaps sell to an ESOP? So that's the second question. To whom do you want to eventually sell or transfer the business? And then the third question is, how much money are you going to need to do anything and everything you want to do once you leave? And the answer to this third question very much impacts your answers to the other questions regarding departure date and who you end up selling to. We believe that the following short list here are critical elements in creating a successful exit plan: a preliminary business valuation, a forecast of future business cash flow, an experienced advisor team, your targeted departure date, your targeted successor, and then that question of that is answered. The question about how much money am I going to need when I leave is answered with this critical element: a preliminary, what we call preliminary financial needs analysis. And it's this last element here, the preliminary financial needs analysis, the analysis that's going to answer that question: what's your number? That's what we want to talk about today. Today's topic is, what's your number? So Walter, when we talk about this critical element of a preliminary financial needs analysis, we actually most often refer to it as a financial gap analysis. Explain to the listeners why we do that.
Well, as we deal with business owner clients, and lots of studies will show this, most owners of closely held businesses have what's the statistic? 80 to 95% of their net worth is tied up in their business, something like that. So the reason the analysis that we do is called a gap analysis is because in almost every case, if you take the number that the business owner needs to have a successful retirement, and you compare that to the assets other than the business that they've saved, like maybe retirement plans or maybe just outside savings, there's almost always going to be a gap between what they need and what they have outside the business. And that makes sense because their largest asset is the business. Mm-hmm. So the idea there is that, let's say my number is I need $3 million in order to retire successfully. My assets other than my business are $1 million. So then the gap there is obviously $2 million.
Yeah, so an advisor that we always work with that's key to this comprehensive or holistic planning process that we're on point in is the wealth manager or the financial advisor, the financial planner. And so they're going to produce that number. Through the work they do. They're going to ask you, the business owner, all the goals, questions, or we're going to ask you together because we're asking similar questions regarding financial goals, but values-based goals and legacy goals, and then what you want life to look like after the business. Some folks want to retire and just get on their boat and travel around the world, or go play golf, or whatever they want to do. Some want to refire, and they've got something else. Maybe they want to start another business. Maybe they want to help their kids start a business, whatever it might be. It's going to cost money. And so they'll no longer have the income that they've enjoyed from the business for as long as they've had the business. So they've got to produce income in other ways. And so the wealth manager is going to help you come up with that number. What's your number? The number, in conjunction oftentimes with the CPA, which is Walter's role a lot of times, because the tax piece is very important and often overlooked. So they're going to come up with that number, and they can do that by not putting in a number or value for the business. And so, yes, to Walter's point, there can be a gap. So Walter, let's talk about that other critical piece that you often provide to the wealth manager, and that is the preliminary estimate of value. Talk about that a little bit, and how it's so important for this financial gap analysis. Well, you just mentioned it a couple minutes ago. Let's talk about it again, though, because it's so important.
Yeah, I think it's obviously a critical piece, and I like the term you always use, Pat, is exposing reality. And that's really the goal of this exercise, because way too often, a business owner thinks he knows what his business is worth, but he hasn't really based that on any real facts. It's more just like, well, I make this much or whatever. But that can really lead to problems, because, as we've talked about in other podcasts, the value that's going to factor into your retirement is going to be the transferable value, which is oftentimes very different from the amount that you're able to take out of the business while you're running it. So just keep that in mind. So it's critical that you have an estimate of value done, and this isn't a $20,000 process or anything else, but it's going to give you a true unbiased view of what your business is really worth. And it's going to identify ways that you can grow the value of that business. So, we may come up with, this is what your business is worth today, but in most cases, if the business wasn't so centered around the owner, it'd be worth more, that type of thing. So it's really a very critical piece of the equation. And, the thing to keep in mind is, when you talk about the three questions, when you want to sell and who you want to sell to are kind of their preferences. The amount you need to retire is not a preference. That's what you need to successfully, live in retirement. So it really is the critical piece. And it's there's obviously a lot of interaction between the three. So for instance, someone may come to us and say, I'd love to transfer the business to my management team. And then we do the gap analysis, and it turns out that the business is worth, their gap is, let's say their gap is 2 million. The business is worth 2 million, which is great. But chances are, when you go to that transfer to insiders, you're not going to get full value. Or if you are, it's going to be spread out over time. So maybe that's okay, but then what you're going to have to decide to do is just sell to a third party. So the gap analysis really helps inform those other decisions. So we look at those as preferences, and to the extent that it can be accommodated, that's certainly our goal. But sometimes that just isn't the case.
Yeah, and so that preliminary evaluation or estimate of value, it's a key piece, because most wealth managers, they're not doing that work. And they're doing the personal financial needs analysis, but they're not most are not doing estimates of value or business valuations. And so it's not uncommon in that process, the financial needs analysis, for the wealth manager simply to ask the business owner, do you know what your business is valued at currently? So I can plug that number in to my calculations. And too often it's a back of the envelope number. And in our experience in doing this work, I think we've only had, only had one or two business owners who thought their business was worth less than it actually was. And so it's important to get an objective perspective there, because meaningful planning absolutely requires accurate data. And so that's a key piece to get the accurate data on, is that estimate of value, so that your wealth manager really has a realistic number for that calculation.
Yeah,
And
and keep in mind, Pat,
yeah.
I think you kind of asked me this and I didn't answer it, but the other piece is the value of the business that's going to end up impacting your financial plan is the value of the business after you pay taxes on the sale and after you pay transaction costs. So very often, whatever the value is, you've got to knock off 30% plus as to what's really going to end up in your financial plan.
Yeah, and too often that's overlooked and underestimated.
Yeah.
And
so I think, I always, gap analysis, it kind of has a bit of a negative connotation to it. But, I look at it, I go back to your favorite saying, exposing reality. It's as long as you've started the process early, knowing there's a gap, that's great. You now have the knowledge, and you have time to correct to fill the gap. And oftentimes, if you start early enough, you can implement changes into your business itself. It's going to grow the value of it. If you wait till the last minute, then you're oftentimes left with, well, I can't transfer to insiders now. I've got to do a third-party sale, or I'm going to have to hang around part-time for a few years, or I was hoping to get out this year, but I'm going to have to wait 3 years. Because one of the things that's really amazing is when you're looking at your retirement planning, the financial impact of the early years makes a huge difference. So for instance, if you decide to stick around for 2 years, and because of that, you're able to continue to accumulate as opposed to spend, it just makes an incredible impact on all the numbers. If you're eating into your savings from day one, it's amazing how that can really have a negative impact. So it's a really neat exercise, because you can play around with different variables and really see what works.
Well, yeah, and it's freeing really too, once you know what reality is, and to give credit where credit's due, exposing reality. Yeah, we use that terminology a lot, and we got it from Larry Bossidy and Ram Charan in their book Execution, a classic for listeners. If you want to read a great book on executing on strategy, be it for growth and building value or exit or whatever you want to execute strategy on, read Larry Bossidy and Ram Charan's book on execution. I read it about 20 years ago, and it still sticks with me. And basically, and really the work that we do, Walter, in exit planning is just one gap analysis after another, really. Because we're talking about financial gap analysis today, but we also assess the readiness of a business for whatever exit route is being chosen. And so there's a process of, okay, where do we need to be with the business in regard to sellability or transferability, and let's expose reality as to where we are right now. And then is there a gap? And it's fine that there's a gap. Let's just find out what it is, and then let's put a plan in place to make it happen. And that's really it describes exit planning is let's identify all the gaps on the personal side as well as the business side, expose reality, and just see what we need to do. And that's why, again, it's so important to get started earlier or sooner rather than later. But I got off of our topic there a little bit. So financial gap analysis. Yeah, so, and you've mentioned this already, how it impacts the other questions as to your target departure date. You may think, oh my goodness, I'm ready to leave. I'm going to leave in 2 years. And we said, okay, that's great. That's good. 2 years. Well, let's figure out how much money you're going to need in order to do that. What do you want to do after the 2 years? You're only 60 years old. What are your plans for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years? All right, well, do you know how much that's going to cost? Kind of, sort of. Well, let's figure it out really net of taxes. And then you find out that, oh my, I thought it was going to take 3 million. It's going to take 5 to do everything that I want to do. And I want to leave in 2 years. Something's got to change. Either I'm going to be able to get it done for 3 million in 2 years, or I'm going to have to extend my departure date. And the same thing plays true, doesn't it, with the with who you choose? And you gave one example, who you choose as the successor. You gave an example of selling to insiders. Yeah, so that can take a long time, and there's risk to it. And unless you do a whole lot of planning on the leading into it, the odds aren't with you that it's going to be successful, or the statistics aren't with you. And so you really have to, and so this financial needs, financial gap analysis really does drive and is foundational to a lot of these other questions and decisions.
Yeah, it really is. And I think, a lot of times when business owners look at their finances, there are, if there is a gap, and it's going to be really difficult to make it up, just through the value of the business and other investments and stuff. Oftentimes they do have to make some decisions regarding spending. And I mean, it usually just is a reality that your spending is going to have to go down. So sometimes that means you can't, be supporting your adult children the way they're used to. Or maybe, you've got expensive hobbies, or the third house that maybe you don't really need, or maybe turn into a rental. So there are lots of options out there. But the important thing is that you have a good number, and you're working from a fact-based foundation.
Yeah, most of the time, and you mentioned this early on too, that if there is a gap, if there is a financial gap and it's fairly significant, and you've got to make that gap up within just a few years, usually it's going to be mostly made up by increasing the value of your largest asset, which is the business. And that's going to take time, and it's going to take money. So it's good to expose that reality as soon as possible. And that gets back to the estimate of business value. You look at your investment statements regularly, probably your 401k statement, your brokerage statement, whatever other investment statements you have regularly, probably. But what's interesting is you don't have a value regularly, an objective value regularly on the largest asset that you have. Not always the case, but most often with the people that we're working with. And so we would say do it. You can do it annually. It's not costly, but to not do it could be costly.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So anyway, any other things, anything else we should say about this?
No, but I think, people need to be, a lot of our clients who have been high earners all their lifetime, it'll be a bit of a surprise, that might be a surprise, that Social Security is really a very substantial number for most of them. So it's important that, their wealth manager gives them some guidance on the best strategies for taking out their Social Security benefits. But that can be a big number. For clients who maybe own the real estate that their business is in, that's another good way to continue to generate income in retirement, is hold on to the real estate yourself and rent it back. And I see more and more clients who just kind of ease their way out of the business. I mean, they might sell, but they still hang around a little bit. And I think it benefits both parties. And I'm not talking about continuing to work, 1,500 hours a year, but maybe they work 300 to 600, something like that. They have some income coming in, their mind is active, and they're helping the business succeed. So I'm seeing more and more of that. And I think part of that is also that people are getting out a little bit earlier. And because of that, they're wanting to continue to stay involved somewhat.
Yep, good. That's a good point. Yeah, we mentioned another critical ingredient to a successful plan, and that's forecasting future cash flow of the business. And so, the future cash flow of the business is so very, very important because it's going to impact the valuation of the business, and it's going to impact your timing as to when you're going to be able to exit. It's going to impact the result that you get from this financial needs analysis, because you'll put the value of the business in, and depending on the future cash flow of the business, the current cash flow and the future cash flow, that's going to determine the value of your largest, again, what's probably your largest asset. So one thing to keep a real close eye on that directly pertains to the business, but indirectly absolutely is connected to your personal financial needs analysis, is not just your personal cash flow, future cash flow, but the future cash flow of the business and how strong it is, and if it's growing and increasing. Would you have anything to add to that, Walter, that thought?
No, I think it's a really good point. And I think the other thing that, for listeners to be aware of is it's really kind of interesting, but like Pat mentioned, working on the value of your business is critical, but I think sometimes owners are not always aware of kind of the compounding effect of that. So let's just say that you can increase the value, you can increase your cash flow by $200,000 a year. So number one, you now have another $200,000 net of tax that you're able to save, which is going to reduce your gap. And that extra $200,000, if you're going to sell your company for, say, a 4 times cash flow multiple, you've now increased the value of your business by $800,000. So it really is amazing. And you definitely far and away get the biggest bang for your buck by investing in the value of your business. And oftentimes, it means short-term pain for long-term gain, because maybe you've got to give up a little bit of your take home because you're adding a manager or you're adding a salesperson. But you always do those things with the idea that they're going to more than pay for themselves, not right off the bat, but hopefully pretty quickly. But that's what Pat and Corby, ENNIS Legacy, what they're so good at is helping business owners quantify those decisions and make those decisions and really grow the value of the business.
Yeah, and then sometimes after the preliminary financial needs analysis or gap analysis is performed, it might make sense. And we've had situations like this, and this is where our agnosticism, if you will, as to what exit route an owner chooses is one of our differentiators. But once this financial gap analysis is performed and a financial advisor says, you know what, if you can save $100,000 a year for the next 3 years, you've done it. And maybe this business owner is at a point in their life where, building the value of the business is going to require so much work and added stress and work and risk to their life that they decide, I don't want to do that. I'm going to put a cash balance plan in place because I can. And I'm going to save as much money as I can for the next 3 years outside of the business. And then whatever I can sell the business for in 3 years, that's what I'll do. And that'll just be icing on the cake. I'll get whatever I can from an asset sale. But I'm going to meet my goal as my exit goal, the departure date goal and the financial goal by investing X number of dollars over the next 3 years or 5 years or whatever it is, rather than investing that money back into the business. I just don't have the energy for it anymore. I don't want to do it. I don't have to do it because I've got the cash flow where I can take it and invest outside of the business. We've had some situations like that where that's made the most sense. And that's where it gets down to let's expose reality or clarify what all of your goals is, so that, we can look at it holistically and come up with the best exit solution for your particular situation.
Yeah. And I think, it comes down to something we probably say every podcast: the earlier you start, the better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the earlier you start, the better. And if there's one thing you're going to do frequently, or it's going to be this piece that we're talking about today, is to have an annual review at least with your financial advisor. And we think you're wise to get an annual estimate of value on your business so that wealth advisor has a good solid number. And two, you can see if indeed the value of your business is growing, which is what you want it to do in most cases. So do these things annually, at least, we would say. Anything else that we've left out that we should put in here before we close?
I can't think of anything. I think we've covered it pretty well.
Don't forget to consider taxes.
Yep.
Too often that's.
I guess here's the only other thing I would say, Pat, is each business is unique. So don't think because you know what your buddy sold his business for that you have a good idea what your company's worth.
Yep.
Because there's just no way that's going to be a reasonable comp for you.
Yep. No, that's a big mistake that's often made. And then they get surprised.
Yep. And that's, the other thing is you can make up for financial mistakes while you're earning, because you can you can earn more. Once you're retired, if your calculations are all wrong, it's not that easy to all of a sudden go, oh, well, I guess I got to go back out there and start making some money. So, not to scare people, but it's just really important to get this locked down.
Yep. Okay. All right. I guess we've done it. We'll probably think of 5 more things once we end, but that's a good summary, I guess. Okay. So listeners, thank you. If you want help in any of this, or in building transferable or sellable value, or planning your eventual exit comprehensively, you can reach Walter at 301-950-9090, and you can reach me at 301-859-0860. Again, thank you for listening. If you've benefited, please consider liking us, liking the podcast, and then sharing it on your social media platforms. Until next time on the Exit Readiness Podcast, this is Pat Ennis and Walter Dial signing off.